Thank you and good morning. Before you get into all of the things that you're really here for to get the updates on Click, thank you very much, Jane and your team, for inviting me to talk about the future. Well, really to talk about today and how the future is already here. If you are using social media and you hashtagging and connecting on Twitter, please use my Twitter handle, Futurist Graeme, as well, and then we can keep up the conversation after the presentation. We live at a remarkable moment in history. We live at a time when, as Riyadh's already talked about, things seem as if they've gone a little bit crazy. In the political sphere, there's plenty of examples there, of course, but in our economics, in our marketplaces, in our business world, many people that I connect with and interact with are really glad to see the back of 2016. But 1 month into 2017, and I'm not sure too much has changed, right? It feels like things are out of control. And there is a reason for that. It's not just that we're dealing with a current economic or political crisis. Or some little bump in the road and we can just grit our teeth, get over it, and everything's going to be fine. I really do believe that it is more and more evident every passing day that we live at an inflection point in history, at a time when history itself is beginning to shift and the rules for success and failure are being rewritten in all of our industries. And our problem is that we can often miss those turning points. We can be like these two guys. You know, they fishermen, they do what they do for a living. You do what you do. Some of you will recognize this picture because you do have colleagues who are half asleep some of the time. But we don't necessarily look around us for the big unprecedented forces. Things that are coming our way, maybe we've never seen them before or they've never been this big. And by the time we notice them, you've got to wake your team up. Got to get the motor of your business going. It can be a little bit scary. And for the accountants in the room, we don't want bailouts either. Not at this stage. The reason for this is the concept of exponential change. Our brains are not tuned in to compounding and to exponential change. We tend to notice incremental change, small changes. But what happens is nothing. And then nothing happens again, and then a little bit more of nothing happens. And then suddenly everything happens. That classic hockey stick graph, as they call it, of change. And that's where we find ourselves in 2017. We're a whole lot of different forces, political, economic, social, technological, all of these forces combining together to create a moment of deep structural change in history. And the rules for success and failure are shifting. And when a shift happens like this in an industry, it doesn't just impact that industry, it ripples across the entire globe. Let me give you a simple example from an industry that we know well. One of the things we know is coming soon is driverless cars. It's coming much faster than anybody anticipated. There are already driverless taxis legally operating in Singapore. Can take you from Changi Airport down to the harbor. Pittsburgh are about to make driverless cars legal. If you go to Pittsburgh in the USA, that's headquarters of Uber, by the way. You'll just see Uber cars driving all around with a driver sitting there, but with a clipboard. It's a little bit unnerving when you drive up next to a car and the guy's actually reading a book and making notes. You wonder if he turns into you and has an accident, he'll just go, sorry, and put a little cross on his check, just drive off again. But they're busy mapping the whole of Pittsburgh. Last year in September, a trucking company called Otto that Uber had actually bought. And by the way, you understand that as a speaker who speaks on change, I'm legally obligated to mention Uber at least 3 times in this presentation. So tick number 1. But Uber bought a trucking company called Otto, and in October last year they delivered 50,000 Budweiser beers in a truck that had absolutely no human in it, no driver at all. So we know this is happening and coming, but what does it mean 5 years from now or 10 years from now? I think there are two things that are going to happen and happen almost simultaneously. The first is we're going to move very quickly from having legal driverless cars to having compulsory driverless cars. You see, it's only when every single car in a traffic system is driverless that you get the real benefit. Because then every car can speak to every other car, and all the cars can tell each other what they're trying to do, and the cars between them can come up with the correct traffic pattern. So those of you who got stuck in traffic driving in today, and you realized that, you know, on the lanes leading out of Sandton, there weren't a lot of cars, and you could have maybe driven on that side of the road as long as the cars coming knew you were coming. Basically what I'm saying is we can all drive like the taxis do already. But we can do it legally and safely. No, but in all seriousness, we're going to move very quickly to compulsory cars. But the other side of this is fascinating too. So how many of you drove here today? Okay, where's your car right now? You hope. Okay, hopefully where you left it, which is parked, right? Doing absolutely nothing. In fact, your car is only used 4% of its life. Did you know that? It's the most useless asset you own. Given how much you paid for it, 96% of its life is spent parked. Now imagine your car was driverless. So your car could have delivered you here this morning and then spent the rest of today doing something useful with its life. You know, getting into the Uber system and then carrying, there's the second tick, carrying people around the city, earning some money even, and then coming back here later this afternoon and ready to pick you up. Now, as soon as you get that in your head, that picture, you'll realize very quickly that it doesn't have to be your car, right? Why does your car have to plan to be back here in time? You can just take the next car that's here. So as soon as we move from legal driverless cars, we're going to move quickly to compulsory driverless cars, and we're going to move from there to shared cars. But now it gets fascinating. By the way, I think that's 2035-ish. I do think it's going to happen that quickly because it solves our traffic problems, it solves the death on the roads problems, it solves congestion, it solves pollution. There are 1,000 reasons to do it. But now the question is, so who does it impact? So obviously the taxis, the trucking drivers and so on, that's a massive impact there, that's obvious. But let's think about insurance. Who owns the car? If all the cars are shared, who's owning them? And whose insurance is it? You're sitting in a driverless Uber car. It's the third one, that's the last. Who's insuring that car? And if you have an accident, who's paying the premiums and who's collecting on the insurance? Then you can go a step further and say parking. About 20% of real estate space in Sandton is taken up by parking. We don't need that anymore. So all of that space becomes entirely usable. We can turn it into shops and offices. This has a massive knock-on impact on construction. I mean, the whole of Sandton's a construction site, but it won't need to be for a number of years because we'd have massive overcapacity of real estate space. So I wouldn't be in construction, but I might be in interior design because you've got to turn a parking lot into a usable space. And then I've got to think of the municipalities and the local town councils because they're not going to get money from parking garages anymore. They're not going to get fines. A lot of their income comes from traffic violations, and those don't exist anymore in this system. And finally, just to push your minds a little bit, I also think regional airlines will be impacted. Why would I fly down to Bloemfontein or fly to Durban when I can get in a driverless car, I can sleep on the way down in my own car, don't have to go near an airport, I can work and engage my car, and when I arrive, I have a car that carries me around, and then I can come back again. So I don't know if the CEOs and the executive team at Mango and Kulula and Comair are busy thinking about driverless cars. But they should be, right? And that's just one little thing that we already know about. We are living at a moment of exponential change. And something that happens in another industry may have a ripple effect very quickly across yours. So as we sit here this morning, contemplate what 2017 might look like for us, I really do believe that we need to have a think about what are the skills, what are the habits, what are the systems and processes that we have in place to enable us to be successful in times of disruptive and exponential change. So let's call it a future-focused toolkit, and I'd like to put 5 things into that toolkit for you this morning. The first, I think, is fairly obvious and clear, and that is that we need to switch on our radars. Yes, we live in a world of massive change. Yes, we live in a world where new technologies are coming out every day, but most of us let that pass us by. We're focused on doing our job, on getting through today's inbox and email list, on getting through this week's to-do list, on getting this month's budgets sorted out, on dealing with this year's plans. We don't necessarily lift our eyes a little bit to the horizon to see some of these big shifts, to have some of these conversations and thoughts. Yeah, every now and again, maybe you come to a conference like this and you get a little bit of insight from a speaker, but we've got to build this into our day-to-day lives, into our jobs. So let me just do a little bit of that for you, not just tell you to do it. Let me do a little bit. Let me just point the radar at the horizon and show you 3 or 4 things that I think are hugely important and significant in 2017. If we're thinking about exponential change and things that could change our world substantially in the very near future, I think one of the most significant things happening right now that a lot of people are not seeing, especially here in South Africa, is that we are about to enter a new age of how and where we get energy from. And I really do believe that within the next 15 to 20 years, significant parts of the planet, significant percentages of the world will have free energy, free electricity. Now, I realize speaking to a South African audience, there's just a little bit of a brain explosion when you hear those words because you're wondering if you even have electricity. Forget the price. But there are a number of reasons I say this. We are developing remarkable new technologies that will produce energy in ways we've never done before at remarkably cheap prices. Probably the most ambitious of all of the projects is a project called ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. Has anybody heard of this? Okay. There's 1 or 2 hands going up, but generally none. So ITER, if you check it out, please do, it's iter.org. This is a massive underground vacuum chamber that's covered, surrounded in magnets. The size of that device there is about the size of an Airbus A380. Okay, so this is monstrous. And what you do is you pump that thing full of deuterium and tritium, which you then superheat using 50 megawatts of electricity, and you then get a nuclear fusion reaction. This is the good type of nuclear that doesn't have waste products and just produces heat. And out of that reaction, you get 500 megawatts in 10 times the amount of energy out of it in the thermal energy. In other words, it can self-replicate and need no further energy and fuel. It'll be the first time we get this right. In other words, in simple language, we're building a star. That's exactly what happens in the middle of the sun every single day. And we are building a star on Earth. Isn't that a remarkable thing to say? Yeah? And I'm not making this up. I mean, they're the photographs from the site. Our team has visited this, spoken to the CEO. It's due to come online in 2027. In addition to ambitious projects like this, solar is going crazy at the moment. The price of solar has halved in the last year alone. The efficiency of solar panels has doubled in the last 18 months or so. And the size, in fact, of solar panels is reducing dramatically too. We're building massive solar arrays all around the world. In fact, last year, in April, Germany, and if any of you know anything about energy, you'll know Germany is probably leading the way in terms of moving to renewable energy. They are closing their coal-fired power stations. They're closing their nuclear stations. That's why there are no Guptas in Germany. And they are going to renewables. In April last year, 15, 16, 17, middle of April, they had a particularly windy and sunny spell. And they actually produced too much energy. The electrical grid in Germany was literally heating up because there was too much electricity in it. So they sent an urgent message out on radio and TV and social media saying to the German citizens, please use electricity. Exactly. South African audiences, switch on your lights, turn up your geysers, go back to your factories. Fearing that nobody would do that, they then went a step further and said, we will, for the next 3 days, any energy you use, any electricity you use will be given as a credit on your next statement. Not only did Germany get free electricity last year, they were paid to use it. So I'm standing here making predictions about the future, and last year something even crazier happened. This is the world that we live in. And of course, if you're going to get solar right, you have to get batteries right, because you have to store the energy in case you don't have the sun. And Elon Musk is leading the way in producing remarkable batteries. Those of you who know anything about his Tesla cars, the Tesla car can go from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 3.5 seconds on a battery. It gives a 600-kilometer range on a battery, and the battery is recharged in 15 minutes. Those of you with iPhones, remember that by lunchtime when you're looking for a plug point. This is Tesla's gigafactory. It will be, when it's completed, the world's largest factory. To give you a sense of scale, that little black dot down there is a lorry. And this is going to be producing the batteries we need to change the world. One final reason I'm hugely optimistic about what I'm saying here is that some of the world's richest and cleverest people have gotten together and created the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. If you're interested, the website address is breakthroughenergycoalition.com. It's headed up mainly by this guy. You might have heard of him, Bill Gates. And they plan to find and fund and support miracle energy solutions. And they've already found a few, and they're working hard to find more. We are, within the next decade or two, going to live in a world in which energy is no longer an issue, in which the price of energy has fallen dramatically, if not down to pretty much zero. By the way, for the economists in the room, that takes 20% of cost out of the system. The other way of saying that is it adds 20% to world GDP. That is insane. This is why I am optimistic every time I get up in the morning, because this stuff is real. This is not science fiction. I'm not telling you what might happen 50 years from now. I'm telling you what's already happened. And think now about the ripple. You see, if we solve the energy problem, we'd no longer have a water problem. Water, you might remember, flashbacks to physics at school, is just made up of two things, right? 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, smush them together, you have water. It's that simple. Hydrogen and oxygen are easy to get. Some of you, by the way, talking about easy to get, might have been wondering, hang on, Graeme, that ITER thing, you said deuterium and tritium were the fuel for that. Do you know where we get deuterium and tritium, by the way? Some of you are saying, please, God, make it South Africa. The answer is actually seawater, by the way. It's most easily found in seawater. The fuel for that star we're building is seawater. Just another insane fact. But hydrogen and oxygen are even easier to get because they're in the air we're breathing right now. And literally, you can make water. You can put 2 hydrogens and an oxygen together. Why don't we? Because it's too expensive. There's too much energy required. Hang on, energy's free. It's not expensive anymore. Let's make water. Or, of course, desalinate the oceans or whatever. It doesn't help us in Joburg, but Cape Town will be fine. If we solve the water problem, we can also solve our food problems. I visited Google last year, and this building here is one of their ideas for the next few years. It's a farm. 100% hydroponic, water-based farm. They want to build 30-story high farms in the middle of San Francisco and New York. And then Johannesburg, Cape Town, and the world's cities. There's already a company in Tokyo doing this. Isn't this remarkable? That we live in a world in which one of the key constraints on our world at the moment, the key constraint on our economy at the moment, could be removed, not in our lifetimes, not hopefully someday, one day when, but in the next 10 to 15 years. Switch on your radar. You need to get ahead of this curve, not be the person who wakes up when it's already happened and your competitors have already worked out how to do something with it. Get ahead of this. Let me give you another example of something that I think we've missed but is huge. This is not a technology issue now. I want to show you that it's not just technology that's changing in our world, it's everything. One of the single biggest mega trends in the world right now is that each of us is going to live longer than we thought we would. But much longer. 100 years ago, life expectancy, global average, was 42. I know this number reasonably well because my father's mother, my grandmother, was born in 1914, in February of 1914, actually. This is a few months before the start of World War I. And having done research on my family and family history, discovered that her life expectancy at birth, on average, was 42. I mean on average because that was the whole globe. Now, averages can be dangerous. If you've got your head in a freezer and your feet in the fire, on average, you're okay. So we've got to be careful of averages, and for her, she would have expected to live longer than 42. She was a woman. Women live longer than men. She was married, well, not at birth, of course, but married women, in fact, live 7 years longer than married men. And when I was speaking at a conference and interacted with a world, sort of a professor on aging, and I asked her, why do married men die younger than their wives? Kid you not, her straight-faced answer to me was, because they want to. Science, but that was her answer. Scary. My grandmother was white. She was British. She lived in cities most of her life. She was middle class. All of these things would have added a few years here and there, and maybe she should have expected, having been born in 1914, a life expectancy of around 65, 70. Except she's still alive. Next week we celebrate her 103rd birthday with her. Yeah, wow, and yet not wow, in the sense that she is not alone in celebrating her 100th and hundreds birthdays. That's not my grandmother, by the way. In fact, there is a great story behind that photograph. That woman stopped smoking in her 40s for health reasons. And when she got to her 100th birthday, she said, stuff that, I'm smoking again. The reason it actually isn't wow is because there are nearly 400,000 people in the world older than 100. According to the 2010 census in South Africa, people in South Africa who are older than 100, the number was 15,683. And that was 7 years ago, so that number might be closer to 20,000 now. 1,000 people are going to turn 100 today. And then again tomorrow and again tomorrow. Here's another stat for you. More than half of all the people who have ever turned 80 are still alive. Some of you just went, it's too early for Riyadh's jokes and it's too early for that piece of information. Here it comes again. Half of all the people in history who have ever turned 80 are still alive today. And almost everybody in this room is going to join that crowd. It will be a tragedy if you don't make your 80th birthday. That's how we will talk about it. That's what we will say. 80 is easily achieved. And many of us are going to make our 100th birthdays. many of us in this room, and most of our children will easily make 100. This has got to do with all sorts of things, from the sequencing of the human genome, which now allows us to get our own genetic records done. I did this last year for myself and my family. Some of you might have seen that Facebook video that was going around with people finding their ancestry and realizing they're related to other people all over the world, and they've got such a mix of different nationalities in their history. It was quite moving. So I thought I'd do that. It's a company called 23andMe, 23andMe, 23 chromosomes.com. And you can just go, they'll send you a spit kit. There's quite a lot of spit you've got to send back, but you get 3 to 4 weeks later, you get your whole genome sequenced and a whole explanation of who you are. I was very, very disappointed to discover that I have 98% British blood. So, luckily after Brexit, they'll let me in. The other 2% is Neanderthal, which makes for an interesting family conversation if ever we could get the whole tribe together again, because the Codringtons, for thousands of years, have only ever bonked other British people and the odd monkey. Wasn't quite sure about that, but anyway, hey, now I know at least. By the way, interestingly, the Neanderthal blood, there's an interesting thing there, because that makes my blood slightly thicker than other people's blood. I've always known that, actually. I mean, if I get a blood nose, it's gone in 30 seconds. If I scratch myself, the scab's there almost immediately. That's great when you're 22 years old. It's not so great when you're heading towards 50 and also have a cholesterol problem. So now that I know this about myself, it might not be a bad idea to have half an aspirin a day. Now, that's not medical advice. Riyadh will sort you out if you die. But we know this about ourselves now. We can get ahead of the game. Your doctors can become preventative in their care for you. We're going to add robotics and wearable technologies and internal sensors. We know more about health. We know what to eat and what not to eat, even if we don't quite stick to the rules. At least we know what they are. We have better health care. We can replace almost every part of your body that isn't working. And if something falls off, we can even stick it back on. We are going to be able to continue to dramatically extend our lifespans. And this is going to have to affect us, doesn't it? It's got to change some things. So, for example, my oldest daughter was born in 1999. And if Amy just matches her great-grandmother's lifespan, Amy is going to live in 3 centuries. Born in 1999, she will live throughout this entire century, and she will die in the next century. And she probably should expect to live to easily 110, maybe even 120. That's this year's matrics, by the way, the last group of young people who were born in the last century. And almost all of them will go beyond 100. And so I've chatted to Amy about this and tried to explain a few things about what she has to think about if she's going to live to 120. The first one came a year or so ago when she got her first serious boyfriend. And I said to her, you never know which one is the one. I mean, I fell in love with her mother, still my wife today, when I was 16. And we've been together ever since. So, I looked at this guy she brought home, and I thought, this could be the one. But you've got to be careful. Because when you walk down the aisle, and you say, for richer, for poorer, in better, and worse, for in sickness and in health, till death do us part. You, Amy, might be making a 100-year promise to be with that guy. Are you sure that you are sure? We've also got to think about our work. You can't retire at 60. I don't care how much money you've got. You can't live 40 years doing nothing. Because it's not really a money issue. But for most of you, it is actually a money issue. Because you can't retire like we used to think of retirement for 40 or 50 years. You can't. We've also got to think about our health better. This is the oldest guy in his 80s to ever complete a full Ironman. we've got to think about this, because nobody wants to be older longer, right? Well, I don't. We want to be younger longer. Now, if we had the time this morning, we could talk about so many things. In fact, I could probably keep you here till Sunday with all the things that our research team keeps looking at. Everything from the Internet of Things and smart homes to virtual reality, blockchain technology. I'm sure you're thinking about that. Most of you are in a technology and transactional data space. Blockchain is going to be huge. 3D printing is still coming. One of our clients, Nestle, now does 3D printing of food at their head office in Vevey in Switzerland. Unbelievable stuff. We could talk about robotics. In the middle at the top there, that's Skype's real-time translator. Have you tried that out yet? Skype does translation into 17 different languages in real time for free. Okay? It's insane. Well, it doesn't always work. Someone showed me the other day, we translated a phrase from English into Russian, and we used the idiom out of sight, out of mind. You know that phrase, when you leave the room, I forget about you. Anyway, we translated it to Russian, and then we took the recording and translated it back to English, and it came back as invisible idiot. Which maybe is, in fact, the correct effect, but wasn't quite what we were looking for. And we could talk about all sorts of things. My point is, switch your radar on. Switch your radar on. Let me give you one final example and go in a completely different direction. You see, I think one of the biggest things that's going to happen in the world of work, the world that takes up a lot of our time every day, in the next 10 to 15 years, almost half of us in this room are not going to have jobs. Don't panic, I'm not talking about the robots and the algorithms. I think that'll take longer, but it is coming. I'm actually talking about the fact that we won't have employment the way we think about it now. You won't take all the hours that you want to give to an employer and give it to one employer only and then be owned by that employer. We'll be on contract. We'll be on demand. You'll probably be earning roughly what you're earning now and working maybe some of the time for the person you're working with now. But the way we engage in employment and think about jobs is going to be substantially different from what it is now. You can already begin to see the initial movement towards this in websites like Upwork.com. Upwork's buying up all the others, so I'll just mention them. But, well, in fact, no. There's Freelancer, Elance, Fiverr, Mechanical Turk, TaskRabbit. How many of you have used any of these systems? Again, only a smattering of hands. For the rest of you, very simply, any task which can be done at a digital distance, you can go online and find somebody to do that for you. Does that phrase make sense? A digital distance for a work? This is all of your admin, this is all of your accounting, most of your marketing, much of your sales. It's a hang of a lot of your internal systems and processes. Any task which can be done at a digital distance, there's a lot of people there willing to do it for you. Let me give you an example of what we did. We do a lot of video work, and we put a lot of the stuff that we're researching up onto our YouTube channels. And so we wanted to take our company logo and animate it. So we uploaded it into the Upwork system, and this is what we got back. Pretty cool, eh? 12 seconds, original graphics, music, and that cost me $5. Yeah. Genuinely, $5 US. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that we should rush to do this so that we can just rush to the bottom of the pricing scale. You get what you pay for sometimes. So we have to be careful. But I wonder, this is possibly rude, and maybe the guys behind the AV desk will turn my mic off if I ask this question. But I wonder how much the guys who put the event here today are charging. Sorry, Kim, that's a bit of a rotten question to throw out. But we do have to realize that there are certain jobs and certain tasks and certain parts of your job that can be automated, that can be put into the system. And we can't compete with that. The other bits, the personal touch, the empathy, the creativity, the intuition, the bits that make us human, those are the bits we have to focus on. That's where we have to deliver our value in the workplace. But all the other bits are going to be replaced and automated. And we're going to have to navigate what that looks like over the next 10 to 15 years. So I've given you a few ideas. Let me just give you a minute, literally 1 minute. Turn to the person next to you. What would you have added to? I've said switch on your radar. I've given you a few ideas. We've looked at 3 things in detail, a few other ideas. But what would you have put onto your list of things that should be on our radar? I'll give you 1 minute. Turn to the person next to you. Look, you don't need a PhD in future studies. That is available, by the way. You can do it through Stellenbosch University. You don't need a PhD in future studies to do this type of thinking. But you do have to be awake. You do have to be switched on. Maybe you have to read different magazines. Maybe you need to get a few new friends who kind of have this kind of interest. And instead of talking about what you normally talk about at the braai, you add a little bit of this into the mix. Maybe you've got to connect with some of the younger members of your team who may be more connected to this. Whatever you do, you've got to switch your radar on. Also remember that it's not just about technology. The technology examples are the fun ones to throw out from the stage, but we don't necessarily want a world that looks like this. So, as I draw to a close, I said there were 5 things I wanted to put into your toolkit today. The first has taken most of our time, and I hope it makes sense for you to do this. Switch on your radar. Get your team involved in switching on the radar as well. Thinking about the future is not something that should just be left up to the CEO or a strategy team. Every single member of your team should be focused on thinking about the future and looking for disruptions and exponential change and trying to see the ripples as they come through the system. So make ways to do this. Add 10 minutes to your monthly or weekly team meetings. In fact, start your team meetings with 10 minutes in the future. Get 5 staff members to give you 2 minutes each of what they've seen or read in the last 2 or 3 weeks. There are easy ways that don't cost money, that don't take a lot of your time, that just get your team to think about disruption, to think about what might be different in our industry in the next few years and share that information together. The second thing that I think you need to do is be more curious. We have a model of leadership in our heads where the leaders are the ones who know what they're doing. The leaders are the ones who walk out in front of us and say, we've been here before, we know how this works, follow me, I know where I'm going. But how can those leaders be that confident and certain in our world today? Nobody knows what's going to happen next. Nobody knows where this economy is going this year or what Donald Trump might sign tomorrow. Nobody knows how the ANC leadership battle is going to work out this year or what's going to happen in each industry that we represent in these rooms. We don't know this stuff. So what today is the task of the leader? I think the task of the leader is to be the most curious person in the business. To be the person not who has all the right answers, but who has all the right questions. And is the person who is prepared to ask those questions. Why do we do it this way? What if? Why not? I think those are great leadership questions these days. And I'm not saying that the leaders are the people who walk around all clueless just with questions. They must go and hunt for the answers to those questions. They need to build systems that produce answers. In the midst of chaos. Yes, we talk about big data. Every conference I've been to in the last 18 months, we've mentioned big data. But we've got to make something of that information. We've got to make it mean something. And then we've got to take that meaning and we've got to put it back into our system and we've got to say, there we go, see, this is what I'm talking about. I asked the right question and I've got some great answers out here. This is the new task of leadership. And in addition to that, part of being curious is to experiment more. I actually think this is the most important thing that I'm going to say to you today. Because I think the only way that you and your company are going to survive in the next 5 to 10 years is if you are prepared to switch on an experimental mindset. Let me give you a simple example. If any of you do Facebook advertising, you'll understand how this works. And it doesn't have to be Facebook, any form of online advertising. You don't just spend 100,000 Rand on an agency that develops this magnificent advert, and then you throw it up online, and you watch it there for the next month and just hope it works. Okay? That's what you do on TV and radio, but not online. Online, you create 50 different versions of this thing. One with a green background, one with a yellow background, one with this font, one with that font, one with this picture, one with that picture. And you throw it up for an hour and you watch it working. Then you take it down and you throw the other one up. Hey, you got a 1% improvement on the green background. Excellent. And now we're going to do it only at 9 o'clock in the morning. No, now 9 o'clock at night. And you can do 1,000 A/B tests in a week. And you've got the data analytics that are showing you what's working and what isn't. That's how you do advertising today. If your advertising team doesn't know how to do that, you got the wrong team. Now, why don't you bring that into your workplace? That's the mindset we need. We've got all sorts of systems that don't work in our businesses. Meetings, for example. How many of your meetings are brilliant all the time? You live for the meetings. The space in between the meetings is just dead for you. Can't wait. No, none of us. Our meetings are horrendous, almost all of them. Why are you not experimenting with different forms of meeting? How many of you have ever been to a standing-only meeting? Yeah, no chairs, no tables. Do they go long? They always end early. So if I told you that I could sell you a secret trick that would save 25% of all your meeting times, I will give you that as a gift. 25% of every meeting you will go to next week, you can have back that time as a gift. Would you do it? Of course you would. So why have you got chairs in your boardrooms? Every standing meeting I've ever attended ends early, and yet none of you are doing it. Why are we not experimenting? Why do we not have the mindset of let's try something, see if it works? I'm not talking about just everybody do whatever they like and see what happens. I'm talking about let's think about it. Let's set up an active experiment. Let's observe what happens. Let's record the results. Let's feedback and make decisions. That feedback loop, driven by proper data, is your only chance for success between now and 2025. You must build this into the heart of your DNA. Then we need to make sure that we are listening to all the voices. I'm not talking about diversity here. This is not compliance. This is not BEE. This is listening to all the voices, especially the voices that are not saying what you're thinking. We've got to listen to the younger voices, to the fresher voices. Guys, we've got to listen to the women's voices. We've got to listen to different cultural voices. We've got to listen to the people who are looking at a different part of the horizon and who have sensed different ripples in the system. And finally, we need to confront our limiting orthodoxies. Orthodoxies are habits of thinking and action. The way things are done around here, the way we've always done it. We live in 2017, and yet most of us are still very resistant to change. We mustn't change everything. Some of what we do is brilliant. But if we're going to live in this world, we're going to have to be prepared to question everything and change when we need to. We live at a remarkable moment in history. I am hugely optimistic, not just about the future, but about 2017. Out of chaos and crisis, Human beings always have risen to the occasion, and South Africans maybe even more than any others. Winston Churchill had a wonderful phrase that he used about the Americans back in the Second World War. And I think that phrase applies nicely to us here in South Africa today. Winston Churchill said, "They always do the right thing after they've done everything else." I believe that of us. I believe that of this continent. I believe that of humanity. We will do the right thing. We might do everything else first, but we are going to make a success of this. We just need to change our mindset and our habits. If you'd like more information, if you'd like to get some insights into some of the other trends that our team is seeing, almost everything on our website is just available for free to the public. Go and have a look. And what I've done for you today is if you go to this link at the bottom here, bit.ly/click 2nd of February, you can get a copy of these slides so you can take this message back to your team. And as a free gift to all of you, just because you were here, we've given you a copy of a report that we wrote late last year called the CEO Handbook on more information about this future-focused toolkit. I'm going to stick around for a little while. It's a little bit difficult to have Q&A here, but I'm going to be around during the tea break. Otherwise, get hold of me in any of those digital forms. Riyadh, thank you very much.